We are on the line today with Casey Michel. Casey, how are you doing?
Good, Dylan. It is wonderful to chat with you.
Absolutely, and we obviously go way back. I'll have done this whole introduction at this point, saying who you are and really all of your accomplishments, taking our high school baseball team to probably, 1-11 or something for the season.
You know, every victory is sweet when you haven't had one in a few years. And baseball is a beautiful sport because it really gives you a sense of failure, how to move on beyond failure, how to understand and digest failure. And really playing for our high school, there was an extra dose or two of that. So I think it really fortified us along the way.
Which brings me to the first real question. We ask hard-hitting questions here, which is, where does Ohtani rank on your all-time?
So it's funny that you asked that. So Dylan, maybe you recall from our high school career many decades ago at this point, but I am actually a lifelong and long-suffering Seattle Mariners fan. And look, I'm not going to take anything away from Ohtani. He is a once, not only in a generation, really a once-in-a-century player. But look, you and I are speaking on the 10th of July right now, and I have to say that Ohtani does not currently have the most home runs in the major league. That honor belongs to a guy who is the catcher for the Seattle Mariners, a guy named Cal Raleigh, who, Dylan, maybe you've seen his nickname floating around. His nickname is the Big Dumper, and it's because he has a big butt. So yes, we're talking about very serious topics today. So if we're giving Ohtani a shout out, absolutely. I just also have to shout out Big Dumper Cal Raleigh for at least keeping things entertaining.
That's okay. That's good. I'm hoping that we don't get the hate mail from listeners on the Ohtani shade that is being thrown right now. That's going to be the spin.
It's funny. I will, in a couple weeks' time, go up. I'll be going up to Cooperstown. So I'm calling in from New York City right now, up to Cooperstown for the Baseball Hall of Fame, because the other greatest Japanese superstar of all time, Ichiro, is being inducted. And, of course, as a longtime Mariner, I have to go pay my respects. So it began with Ichiro. It's continuing with Ohtani, and it's a fun time to be a baseball fan. What can I say?
Riding that energy, let's start with first question we ask everyone. What is something particularly inspirational that you're seeing in the world right now or in your life?
Well, look, you and I were just talking off mic about a few different things. One of those being the fact that I have a toddler in my life now. And I have to tell you, Dylan, no matter what is happening in the world, no matter the cascade, the deluge of the news cycle, and I'm sure some of the things we'll be talking about today, certainly some of the things I work on in terms of international corruption and foreign influence, foreign interference, so on and so forth. Having a child is one of the most, it's the most exhausting thing you'll ever do. But it is certainly something that every single day reminds you that there is more to the world than the news cycle. There's more to the world than what is happening in the White House or in Silicon Valley or, wherever it is. And, of course, those are all plenty concerning developments in terms of specific topics and figures and networks. But looking into your child's eyes and having them ask you to throw pillows at them or chase after them or show them how to swing a baseball bat, which she's been doing the last few days. I mean, it is one of those things that, without getting too, weepy over it, is has just, it totally changes your perspective on life. And I can't not be optimistic when I look at her and what she's already achieved in such a short period of time and what I know she will continue bringing to the world, not just me and my wife, but the rest of the world. So, leaning into the kind of heart on my sleeve right now, I would say my daughter is what gives me optimism these days.
That's beautiful, and maybe turning. There's no easy transition to American Kleptocracy from that. It's like, is there a cute quip that I can? I don't think so. For folks who have not heard of American Kleptocracy in general, could you just give us the 30-second 101 of that?
Yeah, so kleptocracy literally means, the root of the word literally means the rule of thieves. And traditionally, it has been used to describe specific regimes, specific dictatorships, authoritarians, anti-democratic regimes around the world, where leaders are dedicated to not the prosperity of their citizens or the thriving of their citizens or even national stability itself, but to enriching themselves and their family members and their friends. It is being dedicated to the pillaging of the national treasury, health budget, education budget, defense budget, you name it, for their own benefit. That is what kleptocracy has traditionally been understood as and what the term is traditionally described. But what I write about, what I've written books about, what I do in my day job now, is examine how kleptocracy in the 21st century is now an international or transnational phenomenon, because that money that these leaders loot in dictators and autocracies around the world no longer stays in those countries. It's no longer spent domestically. It is now moved into third-party jurisdictions. It crosses borders, crosses hemispheres, crosses oceans, and all too often ends up in places like the United States of America, where you and I first met one another all those years ago. And that when we're talking about kleptocracy in the 21st century, we have to understand it no longer as just a domestic phenomenon, but an international phenomenon that, again, here in the United States of America, we are certainly not immune to. And as I've argued elsewhere, we are actually the biggest source of, or I should say destination for, all that money coming in, and then the biggest source of all the laundering, the money laundering that goes with that to strip any identifying information about that, where that money came from in the first place. So that's really kleptocracy 101. Again, I do a lot of work on the United States of America, this kind of end of thing, because we have seen year after year it has only grown, and it shows no signs of slowing anytime soon.
Before we dive into everything, again, this is sort of also a catch-up for the two of us. Yeah. Why did you get into this space? Like, what is it about this topic? You could have done a lot in your journalistic career. Why kleptocracy?
So, Dylan, you and I, to give folks a primer, right? We met in high school, played baseball together. I have extremely fond memories despite all the losses. I should say you and I also went on an ornithology trip at one point around then. It was not related to baseball, but that also helped planted an interest in birding. I don't know if folks can see me wearing a flamingo shirt as we speak, but that's beside the point.
For every interview, I'm pretty sure you wear your binoculars. You got your Sibley guide in the background.
I have. Oh, yeah, Sibley's the best. I have a few of them, but yeah, Sibley still stands the test of time. Anyways, that's a separate podcast. I ended up going to college. I went to university at Rice University down in beautiful Houston, Texas, and I was going to be a sports writer. I wasn't going to be playing baseball with them. Those guys are all 3 times bigger than me, but I was going to actually write about sports. And I became a sport management major. I ended up running the school paper down at Rice. But by the time I graduated, I realized that wasn't the direction I wanted to take my career. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with myself. And the long story short is I ended up becoming a Peace Corps volunteer. I was an English teacher in the country of Kazakhstan, which is beautiful, full of wonderful people. Highly recommend if you haven't visited already. But it was also my first time living and working under a regime that is traditionally understood as a kleptocracy. It's a decades-long dictatorship, and there's now a follow-on dictatorship now that the first dictator is no longer in power. That was dedicated almost entirely to enriching the man at the top of the pyramid, the man who was then the president, and his family and his friends. And that was really something, to see that from kind of the inside out. And to realize that regime, okay, it's an autocracy, okay, it's a dictatorship, but again, it's moving its money elsewhere. It's moving its money to places like Switzerland. It's moving its money to places like even the United Kingdom or places in the Caribbean. But it's also moving that money and that influence into the United States of America. And that just generated an interest in how this operates, what this means for those on the ground, and what this means for those of us in the United States of America. Never in 1,000 years did I think here you and I would be 14, 15, however many years later it's been from that, 20 years since high school, that I would still be doing this, that you and I would be talking about that. But this is just the way the world has gone, that these networks are continuing and flourishing. And it's had a very damaging effect, both in Kazakhstan and the Kazakhstans of the world, but also here in the United States.
Yeah, well, so let's talk about that. It was, again, serendipitous. Casey, as you said, we're talking on Thursday, July 10th, and you just had a new article come out in The Atlantic titled, "America Has Never Seen Corruption Like This." And where you started that was really interesting to me, because when I'm thinking about corruption, when I'm thinking even about tech or AI and all the stories we tell about it, I'm like, well, what's different now? And you've brought up examples of perhaps what we might call kleptocracy, and correct me if I'm wrong, or at least corruption that have happened in the presidency or in the U.S. in the past. What is different now? What's going on?
So, a few things to get out of the way. One, the issue of the reality of the threats emanating from American kleptocracy or corruption in the United States of America do not begin and do not end with figures like Donald Trump or the Trump administration, or necessarily even recent Democratic figures that I have written about before have opened themselves up to foreign financing, especially out of dictators. This is a decades-long trend in the making. What we are seeing right now is simply the culmination of trends that long predate the rise of figures like Trump. But as you mentioned, Dylan, it's not as if this is the first time America has experienced corruption. There have been significant corruption scandals throughout American history. You can go back to the days, as I write about, the days of Ulysses S. Grant, who was a wonderful president, certainly general in many capacities, but his administration was racked with corruption scandals from family members and from members of his cabinet. Maybe you and listeners are generally familiar with Teapot Dome, which was, at least until recently, kind of the great corruption scandal in American presidential history. That was the leasing of oil lands in Wyoming. You can even go to Watergate and look at, yes, there was the burglary, yes, there was the abuse of power, and yes, there's the attempted cover-up, but there are all these other corrupt networks and campaign finance violations from major corporations secretly bankrolling Richard Nixon. These are all fascinating stories in and of themselves and all parts of American corruption or the history of American corruption. But what we are seeing now, the qualitative difference, is that it is no longer a question of purely domestic corruption. Domestic actors, domestic networks, domestic financing, corrupting domestic political figures. Now things have cracked open. Now, because of this broader world of post-Cold War globalization, of the ease of capital transfers and capital flows across borders, the opening up in general of the American economy and economies around the world, the biggest difference, the key difference right now, is that these corruption networks are international in scope. They may end up in the United States of America, and they may have their final, most devastating results in places like the United States of America, but all too often that money does not begin in the United States of America. These are foreign dictators, foreign autocrats, foreign oligarchs, their proxies, et cetera, that, if you've been talking to folks 150 or 100 or even 50 years ago after Watergate, I think they would have just had no capacity to imagine what that would have meant, because for 200-something years, corruption in America was an American affair, and now it's an international affair, which we're seeing play out.
So all that's very overwhelming to me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I know.
And I'm wondering, in the midst of that feeling that I imagine listeners might also be feeling, what is facilitating that? Obviously, this is a technology podcast, but is it just like money flows, globalization, and its discontents that have now arisen, or like what are the factors they are facilitating?
It's a great question, Dylan. There's kind of two ways I could respond to that. One is structural and looking at the kind of incentive structures that lead politicians, their kind of inner circle of consultants, advisors, and donors, and then the kind of the broader world of PR specialists, consulting firms, white shoe law firms, all of this, even things like shell company operators that are helping set up some of these networks. I think the biggest, to use a phrase, the biggest scandal within this is not what is illegal. The scandal really is that almost all of this, is perfectly legal. Setting up anonymous shell companies, using PR firms and consulting firms and law firms to whitewash your image and open new doors, massive donations to think tanks, nonprofits, even some universities to open further doors in the process. And of course, even things like, I were talking about off mic a few moments ago, setting up now in the 2020s, these crypto schemes, crypto investments, and crypto-related networks. None of this is illegal. I mean, there are certain regulatory architecture surrounding it. There are certain disclosure requirements. There are certain transparency requirements. But if you want to make significant amounts of money, laundering the image, even laundering the money of some of the most reprehensible regimes around the world, and doing it right here in the United States, you can do that, and you can do that perfectly legally. I mean, you have to have no sense of shame about any of it. And there was a chapter of my most recent book quoting one of these foreign lobbyists who worked for dictators in Liberia. He worked for Saddam Hussein. I mean, really the worst of the worst. His ethos, as he said, was shame is for sissies, which is maybe not how I would phrase it, but that's how he approached the world. So that's kind of one element, is that because so much of this is perfectly legal, why would you turn it down? I mean, look, you can have the moral compunction to turn it down, but you have to do so knowing your competitor down the street is going to say yes. And if they say no, then someone else at some point is going to say yes. Which I think brings me to the next reality, is that one is that the incentive structure is such that it behooves you to say yes, even if you want to say no. But maybe the broader reality is that in the United States of America, and without sounding like too much of a Marxist, in the United States of America in the 2020s, money is power, and those with the deepest pockets have access to the deepest wells of power and the clearest access to those in power, and can affect policy that they need to or want to see changed either on their behalf or on behalf of the clients who are paying them. And increasingly those are foreign clients around the world in places like China, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Hungary, Rwanda, again, autocracy after autocracy, realizing, knowing full well that the easiest way to shift policy in the United States is to, again, take advantage of perfectly legal mechanisms of pouring effectively unlimited amounts of money into American politics and being able to use those streams of finance to affect the policy that you want to see. So yes, there's the kind of the legal realities surrounding it, the incentive structure, but then even maybe beyond that, there's the reality, the broader kind of theoretical reality that those with the deepest pockets do, by and large, have access to the clearest access to the levers of power in the United States of America. So I've been talking so long that I kind of forgot the question, but those are my responses.
No, you answered it in this really complex system. I want to go back to the legal part, because something that's hard I'm not a legal scholar, right? I'm a tech-y, researchy person. I am wondering, has the legal system always had these cracks and we were just waiting for someone to take advantage of them? Or is it just archaic laws? Or is there something new that's happened within the legal system itself?
It's a great question. It is generally... It's the first element, although you and I are talking about crypto, or we were just talking about crypto a moment ago, and of course there was no crypto-related, there still barely is any kind of crypto-related regulatory framework. So in that sense, that's all completely brand new. And I should say as well that, as I wrote about in that article in The Atlantic today, what we're seeing out of the White House right now in terms of the ease of access and the effective pay-to-play schemes involving these international networks, that's also something we've never seen before. But it really is, in many ways, Dylan, this is I could spend the rest of this conversation kind of running through the history of some of this. It is really, you go back to the 1980s and the 1990s, kind of the end of the Cold War, beginning of the post-Cold War period, and American policymakers, they're on their high horse with as much arrogance as they could possibly have, thinking, okay, this is the model that will survive for the rest of human history: free market capitalism, open access, globalized finance, the ease of capital flows back and forth. What could possibly go wrong? And of course, in the United States of America, that means also allowing anyone to set up any anonymous shell company they want, anyone use corporate formations to donate any amount of money that they could want to American politicians. It's funny because a lot of these networks were originally developed, whether on the money laundering side or the reputation laundering side, and again, that's like the PR firms and the foreign lobbyists. A lot of these networks and policies were originally developed for Americans, for American clients, and especially wealthy American clients, but not always. And it was really in the 1990s or so when you saw the first realization begin spreading internationally, both among regimes elsewhere, but also Americans on the ground, the shell company operators, the lobbyists, and so on, realizing, oh, wait a minute, there's so much more money to be made abroad by working with regimes in Russia or Kazakhstan or Venezuela or whatever it is. And then those regimes realizing, oh, wait, we can actually bring our money into the United States and hire these lobbyists and hire these PR firms and donate to these politicians, blah, blah, blah. And so it was both like a supply thing and a demand thing meeting in the 1990s and then just really taking off like a rocket ship in the 21st century. Yeah, that's generally what it's been, although, of course, here we are in the mid-2020s, and there are new elements as well.
So thinking about those new elements, I know in the Atlantic piece, but also in some of the previous work that I've seen you write, like this Qatari jet, right, is an example here. But it also, in thinking about the crypto, again, maybe leaning into the newness of the unregulated crypto world, are these all the same things? And if so, what is the thing? Like, what is the phenomenon here?
I mean, it's more or less the same thing. It is from the foreign patrons, foreign donors, foreign financiers' perspective, foreign investors' perspective. It is using their access to capital, and in so many of these regimes, again, the Russias, the Azerbaijans, the Qatars, the Saudis of the world, access to incredibly deep pockets of wealth, generally from oil and gas revenues, though not always. It's using some of that revenue to plow into the United States of America via whatever vehicle. The industry doesn't necessarily matter. What matters, the end result of what matters is influencing policy that you want to see influenced or affected in Washington. Generally at the federal level, though, this also happens at the state level. So in many ways, it's all these different tendrils all kind of working toward the same goal. Previously, it had been hiring things like lobbyists, like, maybe you remember figures like Paul Manafort, who was Trump's 2016 campaign manager. There was a whole scandal in the late 2010s of folks realizing, oh my goodness, all these American PR firms are doing the bidding of these foreign autocrats. That seems extremely concerning. I mean, looking back on that whole period, it seems just like child's play compared to what we see now. Because now, again, as you know, as you just mentioned, Dylan, $400 million jumbo jet being sent from a repressive theocratic dictatorship directly to the White House is, I mean, look, I've been doing this for 10, 12 years. I'm almost an old man at this point. I never thought we would see this day. But it's also things like opening up new golf courses or resorts or luxury properties. And of course, it's also things like these brand new anonymous crypto investments, these pay-to-play dinners, and the fact that so much of this money is completely untraceable. And beyond that, there's no regulatory framework requiring the disclosure of who this money is actually coming from in the first place, let alone what impact it's having. Yeah, I mean, it's really, in a certain sense, at its biggest sense, it's a tale as old as time. But in terms of those with the deepest pockets trying to influence policy. But yeah, this is a world where some of the specifics are things I could never have imagined.
Yeah, the real estate part of this is something that's really interesting to me. This is a total also tangent of, I think about the PGA, right? Like the golfing moving over to the Middle East. I also think about like the WWE taking a bunch of money there. This is, maybe we don't have to go into all of that, but it's an interesting part of a similar phenomenon to me about where the money's going. Maybe if you want to talk about either of those things, wrestling, go for it. But I am thinking about Trump 2.0 and what the differences are. Is this just a continuation of the arc that was initiated back in 2016, or is this again something new?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's both. It is, he is not the first president for himself or his family members to profit from his role as president. I've written previously about previous administrations, whether it was the Clintons, obviously Bill Clinton leaving office, opening the Clinton Foundation and opening up their doors to tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars from many of the same regimes, the Saudis, Qataris, Kuwaitis, Algerians, Russian oligarchs, Kazakh oligarchs, so on and so forth. Figures like Jimmy Carter's brother signing up as a lobbyist for Gaddafi in Libya. I mean, you see elements of this in previous administrations. And so you can say that Trump is a continuation of this. You could also say that so much of this is at a scale we have never seen, that it is effectively brand new. And look, this is what the article that I wrote about today. The scale of what we have seen, and certainly some of the mechanisms, some of the newer ones, are unlike anything we have ever seen in American history. I mean, this is far and away the single most, the single greatest run of corrupt networks and corrupt access to the American presidency we have ever seen. And I have no doubt that in a century's time, when future high school baseball players are catching up with one another, they'll say, yeah, it's bad now, but at least it's not as bad as it was in Trump's second term. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a disappointing answer, but it really is. He's shining a light on corrupt networks and policy loopholes that existed for years and years. And he has a culmination of so many trends, and he has done it at such a scale that, I mean, it's impossible to ignore, but in such scope that, yeah, you can also look at it and say, this is absolutely unlike anything we've ever seen before.
Yeah, it seems like it's not just of scale, but also of speed. And one of the things that, when I say that I'm overwhelmed about, and again, maybe this is just my therapy session with you, of like, help me with my overwhelm. But before we get to the what we can do about all of this, more positive spin on this. For you, as someone who covers this phenomenon that's moving at such a speed and size with all of these different players, how do you make sense of this as a network which seems to carry all the different stakeholders at once?
At some point, a month in, 2 months in, had to come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to be able to stay on top of everything, right? You just have to understand that it's such a deluge of information and developments and scandals that you're going to be playing catch up at least through his entire presidency and presumably far beyond as well. I will say one of the real advantages of working in a field like this, even compared to where things were 10 years ago, is right now, even with all of the funding cuts and the threats against NGOs, let alone universities, there is really a network of people, both in the U.S. as well as elsewhere, of researchers, academics, journalists, writers, analysts, so on and so forth, of people that are following this day in, day out, and they have their own kind of specific areas of focus, whether it's American policy, whether it's Hungarian financing, whether it's meetings with Turkish officials, whatever it is, whatever their specialty is. But there's this kind of nebulous international, transnational network that has really developed over the last 10, 12 years that even if you're not able to stay on top of everything that you want to, you can presumably go find someone who has more information into a specific network or a specific development. And look, they'll have meetings and conferences and panels and newsletters. And so there's this kind of sifting, funneling process that has developed over the last decade or so that has been an absolute lifesaver for so much of this. I mean, I don't have to feel like I'm just doing this on my own. If I need information on whatever it is, right? I know that presumably there's someone I can go contact. And if I don't know that person, someone else does, and you can reach out to them and go from there. Again, you're still going to be missing things. And I love the fact that I have an opportunity to write books that are able to delve not only into the here and now, but also some of the history of these policies and the history of some of this phenomenon as well, that I would like to think unearths new information too. So again, for those future high school baseball players catching up, as they sort through the Trump archives, I'm sure they will be finding new things as well. And I just hope they don't feel quite as overwhelmed as we do here in 2025.
I like to see this conversation as really us giving back to high school baseball players across the country. That's really the aim here.
I was going to say, Dylan, I forgot to say, you mentioned the WWE, you mentioned golf. I was talking about this literally last night with another friend of mine, how I was going to be a sports writer. I didn't know what I was going to do. Okay, now I'm doing international money laundering, foreign influence. And then all of a sudden to just see it, it's not quite that it's come full circle yet, but it sure seems like it's coming full circle. Because it's also tennis, it's also boxing, it's now the NBA partnering with the Emiratis and the Rwandans, it's F1, thankfully professional baseball has not crossed that Rubicon yet, but I'm not confident that it won't. Yeah.
Not yet. But that's the next book, is when baseball does cross that. I imagine.
My
you
heart
heard it
will
here
break.
first, folks. This is the announcement. So on this, I do want to turn to a more, I guess, positive side of this, if we can call it. But I imagine you get the question a lot of like, well, what do we do now? Like, what is next? What do we do? But I'm not going to ask that. I'm going to ask for you, in however many years, what does this look like in a more ideal world? Like, speculatively, what is your greatest wish for this area?
So there's the kind of the particulars, and then there's the big one. I'll take the particulars first. One of the beauties of the way that Donald Trump himself has navigated his presidency and undercut so many of the U.S.'s anti-corruption, anti-kleptocracy laws, because we had made progress in the last few years until the current administration. The way that he has preferred to basically freeze enforcement of things like the shell company registry, dissolve these task forces in the Department of Justice going after all this dirty money, and America's anti-bribery legislation. The way that he's doing this is simply by executive order, by just saying we're no longer enforcing this. It's not going to happen, which he can certainly do, and that's very devastating. But the silver lining for that is when another administration comes in, and it doesn't have to be a Democratic one, although the way things are presumably a Democratic one at this point, they will they will still have those laws on the books. And so all they'll have to do is say, okay, well, that chapter was closed. That was weird. We're not going back. We're just going to enforce the laws as they actually exist. That's one element of things. That is something to look forward to. The other element, and this is going to play a role in the next book, is that, yes, even though so much of what we are seeing is unprecedented, the scope, the scale, the speed, all of it, America has gone through significant periods of extremely successful reform in the past. There's two primary eras of that. One is the so-called progressive era of the 1900s through the early 1910s, when you had a presidency like Teddy Roosevelt's come in at the very end of the Gilded Age and began using the levers of power to target corrupt networks, to call for the implementation of a brand new inheritance tax and income tax, and of course to break up some of the monopolies that were sucking up so much of the wealth of this country. That was one era. And then the other era was in the immediate aftermath of Watergate, when you saw the first real push for not only anti-bribery legislation in the United States of America, including anti-foreign bribery, but also campaign finance reform to prevent some of the massive corporate funds from sloshing around in American politics. Now, much of that has been rolled back, much of that has been undercut, and much of that has been kind of forgotten even throughout our understanding of American history. But what I'm hoping to do with this next book is to examine those eras for what worked, what was successful, and what is needed for a third reformist era moving forward that I hope to God you and I live long enough to see. And it's funny to be optimistic about something that hasn't happened yet, or something that has no signs of happening certainly anytime. Like, I have no reason to believe this will actually happen, other than to say, throughout American history, there have been previous periods of significant corruption and a democratic backsliding, and which we're obviously going through right now, and that has resulted in significant reform. Yeah. I hope I can see that. That would be very nice.
Yeah, that would be gorgeous. And it sounds like there's historical precedent of some kind for hope in democracy, generally speaking. For folks, I know we're moving towards wrapping up here. For folks, say, who are sitting on the 6 train right now in New York, I just imagine the audience is mostly just people sitting on the 6 train in New York. But for those people, maybe who are trying to separate fact from fiction, hype from reality, but then also who are just feeling like, well, I'm not a billionaire. Like, what is my role to play in all of this? Do you have any piece of advice or how you think about powerlessness maybe and reclaiming agency in this moment?
You know, that's a great question, Dylan. I mean, yes, structurally, contact your congressperson. Let them know what you're concerned about. Let them know what you want to see in terms of future policy. Even consider running for office yourself. And, of course, it doesn't have to happen at the federal level. It can happen at the state or the municipal level as well. Spend time with people that you care about. Ideally, it's family. It doesn't have to be. But people that bring you joy, and again, theoretically, you bring joy to their lives as well. Life doesn't have to be all politics all the time. Life goes on, and you can find great joy and great solace in many different walks of life. Go birding. Go look at birds. You want to talk about a solace, especially days like this. You can go bird watching anywhere. You live in a city, you live in a country, doesn't matter. Birds are, God willing, always going to be there. Fall migration season is going to be starting here in about a month and a half or so. That's a lot of fun. Spring migration, March of April every year. That's a blast. That is amazing. Go bird watching. Yeah. And then don't forget to vote. Always vote.
Yeah, no, I think the bird watching is real. Colorado's looking great right now. We got some great birds on migratory paths. It's awesome.
I have never done any real birding in Colorado, but it is on the list. There are some spectacular local species I would love to see out there.
Yeah, come by. We'll grab a beer and reminisce about what birds were in outside of Portland, Oregon. The last question that I ask, which I always say I shamelessly stole from Ezra Klein, is there a piece of media, book, movie, music that either you're listening to right now or that you'd recommend?
Look, I'm as much a fan of the Ezra Klein podcast as anyone, so I'm perfectly happy to swipe anything and everything from there. The only other piece of advice is I put on my dad hat or old man hat or whatever it is. The thing that has also bring me solace that I try to recommend to our interns at the Human Rights Foundation is to read widely, read omnivorously. Honestly, I think this is something probably that you and I learned back in high school that was very much emphasized. And so for as much as I focus on shell companies and international finance for my day job, I try to not read too many books about that. And I just finished an absolutely probably the best nonfiction book I've read this year. It's called Revolusi. I have the title here. Revolusi, Indonesia and the Birth of the Modern World by a writer named David van Raybroek. And it's about the broader history of Dutch colonization of Indonesia and the anti-colonial movement that emerged in Indonesia through and after the Second World War, and how that sparked the broader anti-colonial movement of the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even through today. And I cannot recommend it enough. It has absolutely nothing to do with modern oligarchy in the United States or the corruption of American politics, even though that, if you want to connect a couple dots, sure, eventually it did. But that was just something I wanted to shamelessly plug right now that has nothing to do with what we were talking about today, because I think it's okay to read things about things that have nothing to do with what you're doing in your day job.
I just finished a dissertation, and I had to read fiction in order to keep myself sane, and now I'm reading even more fiction and poetry, and oh my god, it's doing my soul good. Casey...
Dylan, no. Before we go, let me ask you, what's the best fiction you've read recently?
Best fiction I have read recently. I'm going to sidestep that and choose a book of poetry that I've been really enjoying, and it's a classic one. It's Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. I'm looking into the camera for people who are not... It's short. I actually think this might be my high school copy. It has my little notes in it, but I recently went back to it. And Walt Whitman, especially in this democratic moment where we're trying to figure out what the hell we're doing, it's given me a lot of hope to look back. I've also been listening to a lot of Hamilton again, which is always a fun thing to go back to. Musical theater.
My wife is positively obsessed with Hamilton even 10 years later, and we were listening to it just the other day. And if I remember correctly, Walt Whitman, once upon a time, a journalist here in beautiful Brooklyn, New York.
That's right.
So, yes, always happy to see folks doing well for themselves. And, yes, recommending Whitman as well. As
we close, can I get one Go Eagles from Casey?
Go Eagles! And for those who can't see, here's our Letterman from 1,000 years ago.
1,000 years ago, yeah.
Go Eagles.
Really dating ourselves. Go Eagles. Casey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Dylan. This is great.